Hi, this is the Cloak and Dagger weekly briefing with Albert Marko and myself, Tony Nash. We're going to start off with a little Cloak and Dagger business. If you're a subscriber, a paid subscriber, you'll notice that we sent you a survey this week about our daily briefings that we've been doing. Some of you loved them. Well, I'd say the majority of people loved them. Some of the people didn't really like them. So Albert and I are trying to figure out what to do with that daily briefing to make it more interesting, to see what we can do to engage people and win over the people who even didn't like them. But so again, if you're a Cloak and Dagger subscriber, we do write pieces based on requests. Like just this week, we wrote a piece on the South Korean election because someone requested it.
Mhm.
And so we do read comments, we do take requests, we are very responsive to subscribers. So go to the Patreon, subscribe. You can have a free account, and that's fine. But subscribe and interact with Albert and me, and we promise not to drop too many F-bombs on you. So, it's Friday. One of the things I was just talking to Albert about pre-show was there was an announcement, a Supreme Court ruling today where they said that the Trump administration can deport 500,000 illegal aliens from Cuba, Venezuela, and some other places. So, it's interesting to watch the court wins that the administration is having. And we're going to start the show talking about the trade loss that the administration had at the trade court in New York this week. So we're going to talk about first. The first section is going to be on kind of Trump and the administration. We're going to talk about the trade ruling and IEEPA and Section 232. Albert has dug into that deep this week. He published a couple articles about that on Cloak and Dagger. Read them if you haven't. I want to talk about inflation. We had an inflation reading come out today. I also want to talk about the impact on the bond market and what's happening with especially the 10 and 30-year bonds. Albert can talk about that in detail. So I think those few things in the first half of the show. Second half, I want to talk about China. Trump today said that China kind of totally violated, those are his words, the trade agreement. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into the U.S.-China trade relationship. I want to talk about Chinese students studying in the U.S. There was a major announcement from the State Department about that this week. I want to talk about the impact of that. We've got 250,000 Chinese students studying in the U.S., so it's not a small impact. I also want to talk about some domestic politics and some kind of gossip that's going around about domestic politics. So, Albert, big week. And there was this big trade ruling, and you were all over it. Can you tell us kind of what did the ruling mean, and what's the likely process, and what's the likely outcome?
Well, I mean, this all goes back to Trump's tariffs and affecting domestic manufacturers for inputs and whatnot. Uh, Hilariously, it was actually led by Republicans that went to that specific court, right? Because of the states were impacted heavily on the tariffs. Really, it was Mitch McConnell and his cohorts. I mean, Kentucky is just really, really dependent on inputs from overseas, right? So
Well, they have a lot of distribution centers in northern Kentucky.
yeah, and automotive, and
Yep.
a lot of different sectors touch Kentucky and that whole area, and on the Mason-Dixie line and whatnot. But so they got a ruling that was basically saying that the president overreached his executive authority in issuing unilateral tariffs because of blah blah blah, right? I mean, from the beginning, the Trump administration invoked certain statutes and laws saying, this is a national security issue. It's based on economics, reciprocal trade, blah blah blah. And I mean, they laid it out left and right. Exactly what Congress had issued the president in terms of executive privileges long ago. I think it was in the 70s.
73.
So yeah, 73, 74. I can't remember. So you know everyone cheered when the courts, blocked all of Trump's tariff actions, and especially the Europeans. I
Yep.
mean,
And the Chinese.
and the Chinese, but the Europeans especially. I mean, they were really
Mug.
because they just have like a political bias and whatnot, and they really were cheering. And I got into it with one of them. He's a friend of Andreas. You know what I mean? I was just like,
Yep.
Why are you cheering? He's like, we don't have to do anything. The Europeans, the mindset are like, we don't have to do anything. Why should we rush to the table? Blah, blah, blah. And I was a little bit taken aback. I'm like, are you guys completely ignorant of how
Right.
things work in the United States? I mean,
Right.
a simple appeal can reinstate the tariffs overnight,
Well,
right?
and why would Trump do anything different than what he's doing until this is sorted out? Just have the bureaucracy do whatever they're doing, order them to continue to do it, and wait until it goes to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I like this. It was a little bit stunning. Like, why would you just over political bias and political anger over Trump? Why would you risk your entire trade policies and
Yeah.
whatnot?
Albert, I want to ask you something because, we saw that Biden kept a lot of Trump's tariffs in place when he was in power.
Of course,
Biden even put some technology embargoes on China when he was in power. And so, for me, of course, I'm a lifelong Republican, right? So I don't ever hide that from people. But, when Biden did this stuff, and it was a continuation of Trump's policies, and in many cases, an intensification of Trump's policies, nobody ever took his administration to court on this stuff.
of
So
course not.
it's transparently political. It's transparently political. It's not just that some law was mishandled or disobeyed. It's transparently political, right? Am I
Of,
wrong on that?
oh no, of course, it's lawfare that the
Yeah.
left has used, not just in the United States but globally, to push their policies. If they can't win at the ballot box, they do it through the courts.
And the other thing I want to remind people of is this: any academic, any think tanker who is poking their head about this, you have to look at their history and ask, how many times have they taken business class flights to China to speak on some topic? How many studies that they've done have been funded by either the Chinese government or a Chinese company or some nonprofit that is funded by the Chinese government? This is the time when those think tankers and academics speak up because of the influence operations that the Chinese government has invested in over the years. So if somebody is with a nonprofit, a think tank, academia, whatever, or even a major consultancy, right? Like McKinsey or whatever, like these guys receive a lot of money from the Chinese government and Chinese companies, and now is when they're expected to speak up.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is so hypocritical on the part of like journalists and professors and politicians that are against Trump on this, because Biden goes in there, has a Supreme Court ruling against his student loan grants, his the student loan program, and what does he do? He just ignores it completely
Yep.
and just continues on, right?
Yep.
Where are the voices for the rule of law back then, right? But because Trump gets in there, right? And I don't even agree with most of these tariffs, to be quite honest with you, right? For different reasons. But if you don't have a problem with Biden going in there and ignoring Supreme Court rulings, don't come to me and say, "Oh, Trump has to obey this random federal court that's usually done for compliance issues on customs."
Right.
You know,
Something
come on.
with CIF or DDP or X Factor or whatever, and you're going to that trade court to settle those minor issues, not things like this.
Yeah,
This
that's
was
just
a,
insane.
convenience court. This wasn't really a massive standing court, at least as I saw it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I
So
think I think
the
that court was.
emergency powers, people are saying, oh, these emergency powers are just made up. I mean, emergency powers were put in place for like the Green New Deal and stuff like that, right? So, a president can basically call an emergency for anything that they want, right?
Yeah, and you don't want to take away the tools for a president to act accordingly in crisis situations, right? This is a very dangerous precedence. It's like you
Yep.
can't, they let this thing stand, and all of a sudden, if there's an actual, a significant crisis in the future, you handcuff the president.
Right. And this is the thing that with all of this legislative or judicial action that both sides need to remember is if the Republicans clear powers for the president, then they have to remember that the next Democrat president is going to have these powers. If the Democrats stop certain powers of the president, then they have to remember that those powers are stopped for a future Democrat president.
Yeah, I can go back I can go back during Biden's tenure, and I have specific tweets. I'm like, okay, you guys you allowing them to do this? Don't
Right.
cry when we do it back next time around,
Exactly.
right? That's
That's
just the way it
exactly
works.
right. That's exactly right. And that's why we should have a three branch government to keep power in check and to make sure that things are applied across both parties, right?
Of
That's
course,
why we
like,
should. But in theory,
yeah, yeah,
so
it should happen, but it really hasn't happened in quite a while.
right, exactly. It's section 232. So if this doesn't work, they'll go back to 232 and 301 powers and apply like 10 or 15 or 20% tariffs on a wider variety of industry sectors and other things, right? They'll
Yeah,
also embargo, say, specific Chinese companies or something like that, rather than go through tariffs. I mean, this is about China, right? This isn't about the
of
EU. It's not
course.
about Canada, other things. Those are benefits, right?
Yeah, the whole Canadian and Mexican thing I wrote about and explained multiple times. USMCA covers 99% of the items that go cross border, and those aren't tariffed. No matter
Right.
what Trump or anybody says, those aren't tariffed.
Right. And I see this often on social media. The administration doesn't have a strategy. It's like, I mean, I don't know how much clearer they can be about their strategy. Just because you don't like the strategy doesn't mean that they don't have a strategy. The execution may be messy, and I'll agree with that, but there's a strategy and it's very clear. I don't understand how people can say there isn't a strategy in place.
Well, because the messaging has been completely god awful, right? The
Yeah.
messaging from the administration has been awful. Execution has been a little bit sloppy. But to say that there's no strategy, it's kind of
Yeah.
foolish.
It's witch casting. It's not real
Mhm.
reality. Okay, great. Let's move on to inflation. So there was an inflation print this morning, 2.3 or something like that, 2.2, very low. We're on target to hit my first half of 2025 forecast of 2.5%, which would be, if it continues on this trajectory, pretty dramatic downshift in inflation from the last few years. So, what is happening? I suspect, Albert, that your view is that inflation will hit in, say, July, August on the back of tariffs and other things. Is that still your view?
Not August. August, starting in August, probably September, in the fall. In the
Okay.
fall. Yeah.
Okay. So you uh so could would you agree that for the first half, we're going to continue to see in May and June, we're going to continue to see a deceleration of inflation
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
on oil prices,
Yeah,
on
of course. I
food,
mean,
on other
oil is
things?
such oil shelter is a big component of the CPI and whatnot.
Yep.
All those things are falling somewhat, but once the economy bottoms out, which I think is going to be July, August, and things start ramping back up, then I think we're going to have not a problem, but certainly a tick up in inflation. Now, talking about Fed rate cuts, you know, uh, what does the Fed do here? Do keep the ship steady and steady as it
No,
goes?
you cut.
Or you want to cut?
I want to cut right now. Like I want an emergency
Oh, oh,
cut
oh.
today, May 30th.
No, no, no. Let's not do that. Let's not do that, Tony. I just think that the Fed doesn't really need to do anything right now. I mean, I think that the economy is not on steady footing, and they really need to focus on that before they start talking about rate cuts and whatnot.
What needs to change in the economy? We've got inflation moving in the right direction. Jobs, I would say jobs aren't stellar, but they're okay. Um, what needs to change about the economy to put it? Because what I hear from Fed officials is this. Well, there's looming uncertainty on the horizon because of trade, and that may result in inflation. Okay, that's a hypothetical. And I know that the Fed deals in hypotheticals, but the reality today is we have decelerating inflation. We have a pretty okay job market. We have a 30-year that is not really where we want it to be. And I know we're not talking about bonds yet, but what would you be looking for if you were sitting in a Fed seat right now to stabilize the economy, as you say?
Well, I want to see unemployment uh, tick down, not up, right? I want to see layoffs not happening. I want to see hiring, manufacturing indexes. I want to see products being ordered from our manufacturing sector and companies rehiring people. I just don't see that. I think it's the opposite. I think it's going backwards.
You think so? You're worried about employment and you're worried about manufacturing.
Now, of course, yeah, number one and
Okay.
two, right? And you can actually see that in the housing market. People are putting their houses up for sale, and the oversupply is pretty big right now.
Yeah. So what's interesting is we've always heard, particularly millennials, say there's not enough housing supply, and because housing is expensive and I can't buy a house, and so now we have that housing supply. So what's wrong?
How it's too well, a lot of it has to deal with remote work that's been shut off now. People moved from New York to Florida and Texas or California to Texas, and now the remote work has been shut down. They can't live in those states if they want to keep their job, and they can't find equal job
Supply.
opportunities. So
Yeah,
that's
that
you know,
that's fair. So now that the federal government's gone back to work, everyone else is going back to work. Okay, so looking at the at housing, obviously that pulls in the 30-year and bonds. Bonds are, I think, under five today, 4.9 something that the 30-year is, and the 10-year somewhere in there. So what would have to happen in your mind for, say, for bonds to come down, say, 75 basis points or something?
oh, 75 basis points.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good one. I'd have to really think about that one, Tony. That is not
Okay.
an easy. That is not a really easy answer. I mean, I think well, here's the thing: the 20 and 30-year bond market are completely controlled by the Fed, right, and the
Yep.
Treasury. So I like to sit there and derive some sort of something out of that market is a little bit sketchy, to
Right.
be honest with you.
The 10 years
I
at
do,
4.41 right now.
yeah, I understand, right? The issue that the Fed has, especially for the long bond, is buyers, right? Where do they
Yeah.
find buyers in the coming 18 months,
Yeah.
right? If you keep up with this policies um, that they don't like, specifically in the big beautiful bill that as it's written right now from the House, you're not going to have any buyers, and then the Fed's going to have to step in and buy out the long bond, right? So that's I think a lot's going to pivot on what are the details in the big beautiful bill that Trump put on
Okay.
what comes out of the Senate.
Okay. So, so what I'm hearing is that Besant has to do a better job of getting the Fed to buy the long bonds. That's all I'm hearing. You said a lot of other words, but that's really what I'm hearing.
Well, I mean, the Fed is going to do what they got to do, but the the biggest problem for the long bond, in my opinion, is what the details are in the big beautiful bill. What comes out of the Senate and what gets approved, say in August.
Yeah, it's not. So I think what you're right about the timing there. I think there are all these expectations that it's going to be signed like next week or something, but there's a lot of back and forth to happen
No,
before it's finalized,
no,
right?
no. Next week, no.
Right,
This thing,
exactly.
they'll be lucky to get this thing passed before the August recess for the House.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
It's going to take a while. Okay, good. Anything else in terms of U.S. domestic politics that's really on your radar right now?
I mean, honestly, the only thing that's really on my radar about U.S. politics now is the growing divide between McConnell's minions and the Trump administration, specifically in the Senate. You have Thune, Cornyn, and all these other guys that are, you know, little devils of Mitch McConnell floating around in the Senate, causing problems for the Trump administration. Now, on one argument is, yeah, they're keeping them in check and so on and so forth. But let's just be honest, they don't like Trump. They don't want this MAGA thing continuing, so they want to undermine it at any cost, at all costs.
Okay, so I'll tell you something about Cornyn. I live in Texas. Cornyn is my senator, and he's already running ads in Texas saying that he agrees with Trump 99% of the time.
Okay,
So,
agreeing with him 99% of the time is one thing, right? But when you sit there and undermine Senate votes,
yep,
pass key bills, is a completely different thing. You know,
exactly. And so we've got the attorney general in Texas who's going to run against Cornyn in 26. And I don't think Cornyn's going to win. And so
Oh
Cornyn
well.
needs to straighten up and get kind of his MAGA on if he's going to get reelected in
Well,
Texas.
that's the thing. Like this is like the consistent story. You know, the Republicans that don't like Trump, they sit there like, ah, Trump sucks, blah blah blah, and then all of a sudden, when they're up for reelection and they see that their numbers are not as what they thought it was going to be,
Exactly.
the first thing they're doing is they're like running to Mar-a-Lago to
Yep.
shine Trump's shoes and tie his tie.
Yeah, yeah, he better, or Ken Paxton is going to whoop him in 26. Like it's not even close right now because Ken Paxton he took the Biden administration in court several times. He's been very supportive of Trump. So I don't think there's going to be any contest unless Cornyn really changes his views on Trump's priorities and the Second Amendment. If he doesn't change those two things, he's not going to get reelected.
Good luck, buddy.
Yeah,
That's all
exactly.
I gotta say.
Exactly. Okay, let's move to China. Trump, I think it was this morning, put out a post saying that China totally violated the agreements that they came to for him to dial down the tariffs. So this would mean that the best meeting in Geneva when he met with the Chinese delegation, that they totally violated those agreements. So
Oh wow, that's a
I,
shock. It's crazy.
yeah, I'm shocked. We're all shocked. We're all shocked. So that tells me that in the coming weeks, we're going to see some pretty dramatic escalation of the tariffs and trade policies and other things. Um, Again, none of us are shocked that China violated an agreement. And this is the problem with China. They want to talk about international norms and they want to talk about international institutions until it applies to them. So they want to hold other people accountable to agreements, but they
Mhm.
don't want to be held accountable to agreements. And we can look at Belt and Road, we can look at WTO, we can look at any number of things where
Of
China
course.
expects other parties to adhere, but they don't themselves. So, Albert, where do you think things go from here in terms of? I mean, we've seen some movement on AI technologies this week where the US has cracked down on some exports of AI stuff and design and other things. Where else do you think he goes other than re-escalating tariffs to 165% or whatever they were?
Oh, that's a good question, right? I don't think he has too many avenues but to reapply tariffs back into, I don't know, maybe not 150%, but maybe start off at like 70% or something high up there. I mean, the Chinese manufacturing numbers were abysmal, and that's the fake numbers. So God knows what the real numbers were last 2 months. So I think that Trump is just going to do what he knows works is up those tariffs and get the Chinese back to the bargaining table.
What he should do is escalate them to 88.88% and call them the lucky tariffs. That would that would really drive it home, I think.
Or just come out with 21 demands. Actually, the funny thing is I told the Trump administration to do this. I was like, some of the people there, and I was just like, well, why don't you guys give China 21 demands? And because it goes back to what the Japanese gave
Oh my
when
God.
just to see some heads explode.
Right, right, exactly. I mean, look, for people watching, those historical references really have meaning in Asia. Americans, we know a little bit of history, but not that much. But those types of historical references or numerological references, they actually mean stuff in Asia. And if a Westerner is going in subtly putting that stuff into a conversation, they pay attention because they don't expect it from Westerners to say that type of stuff.
I
Um,
know that's the whole point.
Yep, exactly. But I don't believe our delegations understand. And one of the things I posted about this past weekend, specific to kind of cultural context, is for some reason the U.S. accepted to have the next round of discussions with India in Delhi. In Delhi, we've got suburban Americans going to Delhi to negotiate a trade deal. They'll be completely overwhelmed, right? I mean, the Indians are so smart to do this.
That is, oh, of course, yeah. That's not a place where for the lighthearted.
No, and
And
half of
then,
them will get sick, I mean,
oh, for sure.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. Whoever agreed to that, I'm sure they were trying to be nice, but it's just a bad deal. Okay, let's move on to Chinese students in the US. So, I was watching a press conference from State Department yesterday where they talked about this US State Department clamping down on Chinese students in the US and really denying a lot of student visas, and this is on the back of the the State Department pulling Harvard's ability to have international students, which is a huge money driver for them, right? So there are 250,000 Chinese students in the US right now, 250,000 of them, right? Which is down from the peak, but that's a lot of Chinese students. Now, I like international students. I like Chinese students. I don't have any issue with them being here. At the same time, I know the State Department has their priorities, right? And so, they have to go through whatever process they need to go through to sort things out. So these international students are a huge money spinner for every university. Huge money.
Yeah,
right?
of course they are. But on the flip side is, why are we giving, the children of the leaders of adversarial countries free education? Not free, but excellent
might be
education.
free in some cases, right?
It might be
Get
free.
a princeling to go to Harvard and subsidize their education, and then Harvard has a relationship with that country for the next 30 years.
I understand that, but it's just, why are we not, why are we doing that? Like, I mean, I know there's dictators' sons. I went to school with a couple of dictators' sons.
I went to grad school with some of them. I went
it's
to
like,
Fletcher. I mean,
why are they here?
right. It's a good question. It's a really good question. And so, I don't have any issue with your, rank and file, even wealthy or poor international student coming. I love it. I love my exchanges with international students. But I think the State Department is right to vet these guys more, right? And a lot of schools are freaking out. They don't really know what to do. There's a hole in their budgets because a bunch of these guys have been stopped from coming. And so it's a big issue. And so, let's see what happens. But this is a very targeted approach, meaning when you stop princelings and bureaucrats' sons and daughters from coming to get educated in the US, they don't want to go to a school in China. They don't want to go to a school in Europe unless they're going to like the Sorbonne or Oxford or something like that. They don't want to go to your normal school in Europe.
No, of course not. No,
they want to go to University of Chicago. They want to go to Stanford. And when you stop them from doing that, and those kids can't go to school there for their undergrad or postgraduate work, it's a real problem because then they can't have the elite education that they need. So it's really hitting them in the family. It's not just the tariffs that are affecting the factory workers. The education stuff hits those bureaucratic families in a big way.
Oh, for sure it does. But I mean, the other argument is like, you want to bring those kids here so they experience the American way of life and build relationships and so on and so forth. Just like the relationship of Xi and I forgot who it was.
Oh, going to school in Iowa.
Yeah, going to school.
The former Ag Secretary, Sonny Perdue.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So that's right. So of course that's the counter argument to what we say. What I'm saying, anyways, is you build relationships that go forward and whatnot.
Well, yeah, and a lot of that started under Deng Xiaoping when Deng wanted to bring more science and technology to China. He really worked hard to get U.S. students or Chinese students studying in the U.S. So this is turning back a lot of the hard work that's been in place and put in place for decades in China. So, and they're doing it really quickly. And so the shock factor, I think, is hitting Chinese where they really didn't expect it to hit. So some of those guys will go to school in Australia, which is great schools, but to be honest, a little bit less serious, at least in terms of the views of the home audience in China. So anyway, we'll see what happens there. I wanted to talk a little bit about domestic politics in China, and you and I had some offline discussions about this, Albert. And I've said for years that Xi Jinping will probably be out of power by 2026, 27. And when he was initiated into his third term in 22, a lot of people said, well, he'll be in until 2030, something or whatever. But go ahead.
It's funny because I had said something about Xi's future under Trump in the first time around. I said if Trump wins the re-election, Xi's days are numbered, right? Of course, Biden won, and Xi got a whole pass for 4 years to do whatever.
And he had his way with Blinken.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Blinken is a disaster. Right. That's another topic. But now that Trump's in there and the tariffs are hitting, the school issues are hitting, geopolitical losses across the board for the Chinese, You know, I, he could be pushed out. I mean, they might just get sick of it and say we want a different path. Things aren't
Yeah.
working.
Yeah, let's look at that from the perspective in China. So you have a lot of factories that have shut down or they're temporarily closed or whatever due to the tariffs. You have
Hmm.
a very high youth unemployment rate. You have a lot of competition for college educated Chinese to get jobs. It's very difficult. The India-Pakistan war didn't go China's way. The military equipment that Pakistan was using, the missiles that they were using didn't work. A lot of them landed in, say, on Indian farms intact, so they literally ran out of fuel, right? Um, Trump just had this win in the Middle East by getting all this money and all the alignment with people in the Middle East. He's making progress with Iran, which is a close Chinese ally. He's really raising some issues with Russia, which is a real Chinese ally. And then China had to, and we wrote about this this week, is China had to announce this kind of sale of jets to Egypt as a way to bolster their defense exports after the failures in Pakistan, right? And so, as a global leader, I would say at the end of the Biden administration, it looked like a fait accompli for China, like they were kind of emergent and ruling the world. If you look at the last probably 6 to 8 weeks, it looks like an utter failure and a clown show. And so you poke through the veneer and there's not a lot there. So I think Xi's power is really in danger. There's gossip about a meeting that happened recently with party leadership where the head of the China Military Commission spoke out against Xi Jinping, and some of the former leaders and other people spoke out against Xi, and she was the last person to speak, which, again, I'm not sure if this meeting happened or not, but he basically had to defend himself. So this is an old school kind of CCP throwdown where they kind of shame you if it happened, right? And so the gossip is this: if that really happened, and some of those speeches that were supposedly kind of published, and you can find them in Chinese and in English translation if you look around, the expectation is there's a plenum, a party plenum in
Hmm.
the autumn, okay, which is a big deal. So the expectation possibly is that there's a new leader in place by the time of the party plenum. So the expectation is that she would be demoted or kind of catch the Russian flu or whatever in August. And that would be enough time to put someone in place with their leadership team before the plenum in the fall, probably October, November. So will that happen? I don't know, but that's a lot of the gossip that's going around. It seems like he's lost the CMC, the military commission. There's been a lot of drama there. We've written about it on Cloak and Dagger. And so there is a possibility. I wouldn't give it a huge probability, but there's a possibility that there's some major changes in leadership in China this year. So more to come on that. Let's see what happens over the next couple
Yep.
months. But I do think that the pressure the Trump administration is putting on them is very serious. I don't think, although we see a lot of people, China fans, other people who really want to, spike the ball and say Trump failed at X, Y, or Z, but I'm just not seeing it. I'm seeing, a lot of the kind of perception that China's wanted to put out there really being degraded because of these talks.
Yeah, I mean the whole Trump failed thing is silly. It's only been, I mean, what, 4 months he's been in
Just over
power?
4 months. Yep.
Or I mean, I mean, you can't really judge policies failure or success in 4 months.
Yep. Exactly.
Not a serious argument.
Exactly. So I just want to say we're not saying this is going to happen, but we're saying this is what some of the gossip is, and it'll be very
Mhm.
interesting to watch this to see if it comes to pass. And I don't know if it did. I mean, look, these are dictatorships, and very rarely does a dictator pass into the night elegantly. Um,
Yep.
and so if you look at the previous generation, when Xi Jinping took over in 2012, they passed on pretty elegantly. But if you look at Li Keqiang, who was Xi's deputy for his first two terms, he died. Some people say he was killed last year. So you play at the top of those power, those top shelf power games. There can be a real problem for your future. And so let's see what happens with Xi Jinping. Let's see what happens with China. I'm hoping that whatever happens next, if something happens next, it's a good thing, but I'm always careful to think that the next person could be more hawkish than she. So we'll see.
Yep, we'll see.
We'll see. Okay, Albert, thank you very much. For everyone watching, please check out Cloak and Dagger. You can start with a free subscription. We'd love it if you'd do a paid subscription. It's only $10 a month for really top shelf content. Please like and subscribe to the video. Again, that's free for you. It helps us out a lot in terms of our ability to monetize this and get in search results. So thank you very much. Thanks, Albert. Have a great weekend. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tony.